Welcome to The Art of Growth. This is Jim Zartman, and today Joel Hubbard and I are interviewing a panel of Enneagram Type 9s. This is our series for going back to basics, and if you're wanting to introduce someone to the Enneagram, this would be a good series to send them because we want to go back to the core of the Enneagram, which is based on looking at people's core motivation and the patterns or strategies they use to meet those core needs. But as always, the Enneagram is supposed to be based on self-reporting, and so we are interviewing a panel for them to put it in their own words and discuss what the core motivation and patterns look like to them. If you are new to us, please subscribe so that you can keep up with everything we're doing, and follow us on Instagram at just Art of Growth. And if you don't know your Enneagram type yet, you can take a free Enneagram test and a very helpful free instincts test to know your instinctual variant, because combining the two is a really great snapshot of your personality and how you're going to operate in the world. All of that is at theartofgrowth.org. Now let's jump in with our panel of Type 9s.
All right. Well, I am super excited to be here with Type 9s, and we're going to be exploring this idea of patterns, the patterns of the types. And actually, it's one of the 9s here who suggested this idea, and I thought it was brilliant. And so we thought, man, we got to do this. So what I like to do is begin by having each of you introduce yourselves, just your first name, and let us know maybe where you're from, and then we'll get started.
I'm Luke, and I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina.
I live in Texas. I'm from Texas, just outside of Dallas.
I'm Keith. I'm in the Phoenix area.
I'm Nate, and I'm from Longmont, Colorado.
Okay. So the big question that we're going to start with, which is rather interesting because it seems somewhat obvious when we're talking about these types, is the core motivation, right? It's obvious to ourselves once we become aware of the core motivation. But I figured rather than me state it as we typically do, and that would come through the voice of a 7, it would come through the language of a 7, is to have each of you sort of describe briefly what is the core motivation of the 9. Now, how would you say it as opposed to maybe even how it's written?
I think one of the phrases that has resonated for me the most is the desire to be unaffected by life, to sort of feel an internal sense of calm, easiness, comfort, just sort of a very flat, coming back to a homeostasis, sort of.
Yeah.
The word I always really resonate with is peace, the idea of peace. And I think that also, for me, that's stability. It's peace. It's people getting along sort of at their core.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's going to be peace, but it's going to be peace absolutely by avoiding all conflict.
I find that in addition to that, also just this constant chase after groundedness. I feel like as a 9, I always sort of feel sort of spectral, like I don't quite inhabit my reality. And so it's that peace, but it's also that constant search for those things that make me feel like I inhabit my life.
It's fascinating. I'm so enjoying the fact that each of you described it somewhat differently, and yet there's this similarity between them all. I love that. And I've heard different 9s say it in different ways that each of you have said it. So yeah, really interesting. With that comes the next thing, which we've oftentimes talked about, but really not elucidated enough, I think, on our podcast, which is like you have the core motivation, and then what does your type do early on in life? Well, it figures a way to try to get that need met, right? So the sort of like, I don't have a sense of peace, or I don't have a sense of grounding, or I don't have a sense of inhabiting my body, or I don't have a sense of, whatever it is. These things are these sort of existential holes, pains, angst that we feel, and then we do something about it. So what is it? What are we doing? What's the strategy, or what's the pattern that you've developed, or you could see developed maybe on its own early on in life? So if you could describe maybe just in general, like what is the pattern? What's the strategy of your type?
I have to share this story because I haven't thought about it in forever, but I was a really little kid, probably was 3 or 4 years old, maybe 5, maybe. And at the dinner table, and we had assigned seating, and my father was pontificating. And basically, I employed our best defense mechanism, and I would absolutely disassociate from the table and fall off my chair. And I did it on the regular. It was like, this space is not fun for me. I'm not in this place. And I can remember how angry he got, very angry. And then I can kind of remember that I had to okay, I've got to figure out how to stay here without falling off my chair.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It wasn't dramatic. I mean, I can laugh about it now. Obviously, a lot of tension at that table, people.
Yeah.
And yeah, but that is as I've thought about this, Joel, that was that memory came back. And I thought, well, there's your pattern.
Yeah.
I think my other thing that I thought about, I played the piano as a child. My mother never had to tell me to practice. And I think for me, that's sitting at the keyboard and practicing. And everybody would leave me alone, and they loved it. And so everybody was happy, and I could go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Into the music.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Thank you, Anne.
I still have my piano bench. If I sit at a piano, there's something deeply, I'm present there. I'm all there in my skin by myself. And it's a good place to be.
Well, so that's interesting, because this is why the pattern isn't necessarily good or bad, right? It's a pattern. And in some sense, it does something really wonderful, which allows you to be fully present to something you love, but at the same time can also be a place of escape when there's so much crazy going on in the house, right?
Right.
Yeah. I remember around, that same age range, that kind of 3, 4, 5 age range. I remember for me, my world was uncomfortable when I heard my parents argue. And it's not that they argued a lot or anything like that, but that disrupted my world when it did happen. So my response was to withdraw. So for me, that was just like being alone in my room, alone with my thoughts. And that became my safe space, was just being withdrawn, being alone, finding a space where I could just sit and think and be in my own place, didn't have to be disturbed by that conflict. And then that led to me developing that pattern of avoiding conflict at all costs, because I didn't want to ever experience that disruption.
Yeah.
I wanted that stability, that peace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have the exact same story, Keith. And it was my oldest sister would argue with my parents quite a bit. She's a sexual 6, a bit rebellious, and I would be in my room, and I would listen for a minute, but then it would be uncomfortable, so I would play or something and try not to listen. I thought that I wasn't supposed to listen. I wasn't supposed to know what was going on, anyways. So I would just play and try to shut it out.
I remember so much conflict between my older sister and my parents. Also. I have no idea what her type was, but I remember they butted heads, her and my dad especially, all the time. And yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of 9s out there going, oh yeah, I have a sister, I have a brother, there's always something going on there. I'm curious, what you're picking up on this. What is it doing to you at an internal level when there is that conflict going on around you?
It really feels like a phasing out, almost kind of going back to what Nate said about kind of groundedness versus being more spectral. It's kind of like or like Anne was saying about dissociating, of just going into my head, going into a fantasy world. I would play with toys on my floor, and they had their own little world. And that was one of the ways that I would go somewhere else.
I think for me, I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but I had a relatively chaotic upbringing, and so it just felt like survival. It felt like this is what I have to do to make it through this day. It's kind of ironic because that brings a level of discomfort and turbulence in itself. And so it always felt like kind of balancing on a knife's edge of desperately clinging to fantasy, and for me it was reading novels and desperately clinging to that, and then also like by escapism I was also causing a different kind of pain. And so like managing different levels of discomfort,
Oh, wow.
peace at any cost sort of thinking. So playing with those dynamics is a weird thing, because there's a lot of times in your life where no option actually provides the peace that you're looking for.
Wow. That is something. That's interesting, because I think that's true for all 9 types, is that whatever the management tool, whatever the tools we've learned to survive, they do have that kind of dual role. I mean, in some sense, it's like, well, it protects you, but it also keeps you from stuff that you really need. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you say that because you had to pull away, you said it created other problems? Was it that sort of like, I don't have connection, I don't have relationship, I feel isolated? Is that what you're referring to? Or?
Oh yeah, like total, like complete isolation, stifling, oppressive isolation. And that's the thing, is I think as 9s we crave that groundedness, and if you're completely in that place of avoidance, then it feels so far away. So
yeah. And I wonder if other types know that about 9s, is that they do crave connection and relationship, even if it's appearing like they are pulling back sometimes on themselves. I wonder if that's also something, sometimes it comes through and it's like, oh, I didn't know that that's the impression I was giving.
It's a bit different, but I guess I'm thinking of, the fear of the 9 is sometimes said to be loss of connection. So for me, I can be avoidant, thinking that I'm avoiding disconnection when I'm really avoiding connection. Like if I'm pulling away, it's because I don't want the conflict, but really that's not helping the connection either. It's the self-fulfilling prophecy of by avoiding, I'm actually creating the disconnection that I'm trying to avoid.
Yeah. I've discovered over the last few years, as I've learned to embrace more the necessity of healthy conflict in relationships and in, be it family, friends, work, that for me, my motivation behind the conflict is to get back to the peace side of things. Is it's like, okay, we have to do this. This is just, I kind of settle myself with going to have to engage, I'm probably going to have to take a stand. I'm going to have to get a little back and forth, but like, can we just get it done so that we can get to the other side of this where we're back on all together and happy and peaceful again?
Anxiety is a huge part for me. It's a huge part of my pattern. And I don't fall off my chair anymore, but I can get really very anxious with the sense that there's something that I need to do to fix this. And then that anxiety becomes enormous, because much of what I feel, there isn't anything I can do. A lot of times, and especially within a family situation. And as a kid, as I went from falling off the chair, then, well, how do you sit here? Well, you sit here and you feel really anxious. And that anxiety grew and grew and grew. And that became a physical illness, because it was just there and there wasn't much I could do about that, except endure it. Except now, it is helpful. It is just helpful to be able to say to myself, I am anxious. This is why I am anxious. This is what has happened. This is the way you wish it was. This is the way it really is. And anxiety is part of, you're saying that to yourself. This feels really anxious.
Yeah. The way you describe it, and I love that, Anne, because I think you're saying things that are, in a way, you're bringing the past into the present as if it's still very present. I think for all of us, that's true. Those early formational experiences, they still function very much as if it just happened. We may fall off our chairs. We may, do something that is a way of kind of pulling back and pulling out of the situation. And it isn't until probably later in life, when we start becoming aware of later in life, meaning like you're an adult now, so 20s, 30s, you start to go, some of this stuff isn't always working. Like it doesn't work quite as well as I thought it would, or the surprise. It's usually a surprise. It's like, wow. Because for a lot of nines, it's like, I'm here. I'm very present to you, to people. And I'm trying to not create conflict and not create problems. But somehow they're still happening. Somehow there is a conflict. And somehow it's me. Somehow I've caused it. And so maybe talk about like when that began to happen for you, when you tuned into that maybe there's a moment, maybe a series of moments where you became aware that your pattern, again, it's neither good nor bad, but there are some parts of it that it doesn't quite work anymore.
I think the pattern that I saw most clearly in childhood was being very obedient and being very compliant. I did grow up in a very safe household and did whatever my parents asked, whatever any authority figures asked. Didn't win me a ton of friends, but the people who I cared their opinion about me respected me and liked me. But as an adult, being obedient doesn't really matter anymore. Like I'm my own authority, but I was still sort of looking for favor from other people or trying to ingratiate myself, but I didn't really know what I really wanted. I didn't have a strong sense of my own self. Not having somebody to kind of guide me or have expectations placed upon me to do what they wanted. So I would say, I guess there was multiple moments throughout my life where I sort of realized that, but I know that when I graduated high school, I wanted to move like 7 hours away to go to a school away from my parents rather than going to one close, because I just had this sense of if I live close to them, I'm still going to be like, I didn't have the language then, but like merged with what they want.
Yeah.
And if I move physically away where I don't have to be near them as much, maybe I can sort of find out what I like or who I am or what I want to be.
Was that a conscious thought? Or can you reflect back and see like...
No, definitely I would not have had the language to say it like that. But I think I knew I depended on them or was too tuned into what they wanted. And I needed to, separate a little bit.
I think for me, my marriage really was the thing that made it show for me. My wife and I got married very young. And as we started getting into those deeper conflicts and that happen as in an early marriage, I started realizing that like this person emotionally is like on a whole different level for me. Like there's this huge disparity between like my ability to like even know what it is that I'm feeling, let alone express it. And she's over here just eloquently like, I'm angry and this is why. And I'm like, I can't do that. Like, how are you doing that? And so, it was a series of those fights that led me to these aha moments. And thankfully she's had the grace to lead me through it. But just recognizing, like this will not stand at this level of relationship. Emotional avoidance is not acceptable at this point because that's not going to fly in my marriage. Like my wife is not going to stand for that, at least not forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm thinking about, my tendency to sort of suppress feeling or ignore feeling or, certainly not name it. And my wife is so good at drawing that out of me, helping me name it, and even like kind of proverbially poking me a little bit to get a response out of me. Like, you're feeling something, right? You're feeling something. And it's been such a gift to me because one, I know that's a safe space to feel. And I mean, I'll still avoid it, but I know it's a safe space to express what I'm feeling. I remember from a really young age, and I think the motivation, now that I can put to words, was that longing for deep connection from an early age. Like I wanted to be married. I wanted to be a dad. I really wanted these things in my life, so we were also married very young and, coming from different backgrounds, different conflict styles that we'd been sort of raised in, and then having friction over that. And, me being like, no, we got to solve this right now because we've got to get back to the peace side of things. And her being more like, I need to take a step back, like, so that we can resolve this well. Yeah, it's just, it's amusing hearing other people say things that feel like me.
Well, I would agree that the marriage and then the children that followed really put me in a place where I began to really observe my own illness and realize that it wasn't anybody else's fault, that it was something that I really needed to do something. And the anxiety has been or was a big part of depression, and coming through depression was for me one of the most healing things, was being able to say, I am feeling angry. And to say I am angry without judging myself wrong. Because there was a whole, there was just a whole collection of feelings that were not allowed. I don't think it was just because I was the girl in the family. I think it wasn't allowed for anybody. And so that I needed to be well. I wanted to be well. I wanted to have a happy marriage. I have a happy marriage and a long-term marriage. I wanted to have good, solid kids. I wanted to do what I could do to help not pass on what was sick in me.
Yeah. So this is good to bridge off of, because I think that the picture that some people get about themselves is that there's something wrong about me being a type 9, or there's something wrong about me being a type 1 or a type 9 or a type 8. And so then we might overcorrect, like in terms of, because of the relationships. So there's like this outcome-based thinking that kicks in. And it's, well, if I change and I do this, then it'll make the relationship better. And I think that that is okay as a starting point. But then it has to get back to but the deeper part is the awareness of where it is that I fundamentally need to change, not because there's something wrong with me, and not because it's going to make the marriage or the relationship or the friendship or the work better, but because there's a particular core motivation maybe that has this lower side to it, right? It has a high side. It's a beautiful side to it, but it also has a low side to it, right? The need for peace, the avoidance of conflict, or the desire for connection and the fear of disconnection. So there's a low side to that, and there's a high side to it. So maybe you can talk about, are you able to, were you able to see that as you began doing the inner work? Where it's it's beneficial actually for you, because otherwise you will be lonely or isolated or feel unseen. So maybe to talk a little bit about that.
I mean, I think the inner work starts just with the knowledge, right? Being able to name something, and just being able to name your type, just being able to, I'm a 9, I'm a peacemaker, I'm whatever. That gives a certain amount of comfort of okay, so that in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because self-knowledge doesn't say I am who I am and that's just the way it is. That's an invitation to improvement, to self-improvement. Well said. So being able to recognize, okay, here's the patterns that I've developed. Here's the parts where it's causing harm to me, to others. What effort now, going against my nature, putting effort into something, what effort do I need to put in here to improve this relationship or this situation, and still, as long as, okay, at the end of the day, do I still get a chance to rest, to relax, to have comfort? And I remember even as a kid, anytime something was hard, a hard day at school or a hard situation, I would think, okay, this day's going to be over at some point, and I'm going to be at home in my bed, and that's going to be comfortable. And as long as I can just make it through, just watch the clock click by, as long as I can make it through, I'll be comfortable again soon.
That's great.
I think there's a prerequisite even to the naming, or maybe just this was my ordering of how I grew. But I think Anlee already touched on it, which was taking responsibility. I feel like it's so easy for the 9, even, I don't know about the other numbers, but for the 9, it seems so easy to fall into this victim mentality of this is who I am, this is what I am. It's easy to feel oppressed by the conflicts of life. And so step 1 for me was I'm responsible for this. for my avoidance. And I could, like, the naming came after for me, where it was like, oh, now I know what this is called. Now I know what this is, and I can get a handle on it. But step one was I need to take control of this. And I think it's so easy to rationalize why your feelings and the turbulent things that are part of you are evil and bad. And I think that in that freedom of taking ownership over that is the only way to actually get to that actual true peace. And so to me,
I love it.
Going on that journey, like it's never felt like a reward. It's felt like a necessity. Like I can't not do it. I have to go on this journey, or I will suffer greater. And so,
wow.
I don't know about y'all. I'd like to hear what y'all have to say.
Oh, I think that idea of like, I have to go on that necessity, that I have to go on this journey or else I will suffer more. That's key. Yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone has to go through that because, once you realize either you're already suffering pretty badly or you kind of, if you're reading the Enneagram, you see, kind of what you could become if you don't change. I don't want to be 20 years down the road and like despondent, emotionally unavailable, not have bettered myself in any way, not have pursued what I really wanted. Like, I'd rather work through this now and like start my life earlier. For me, I guess one thing that resonated when I started using the Enneagram and found out that I was a 9, I was so tuned in to the expectations of other people. Even though I did move away, I was still like acting like a kid in some ways. Any adult or anyone who I perceived to be sort of an authority figure, I would just want to make sure that I didn't offend them in any way, that I was seen as good. I was a pastor's kid growing up. So it was almost like the church was watching me at all times, or someone was expecting me to just be really, really good, really easy, didn't cause any problems. And that just did not foster any sort of authentic community, any vulnerable relationships. It was just, as long as I don't offend them, as long as, it wasn't even that I would try to get people to like me. It was as long as they don't dislike me, as long as I'm at least neutral.
Keith, you're dying over here.
Oh my gosh. I'm like also a pastor's kid here. Like, and I just got to ask, like, is this a 9 thing that I'm just now learning, that we have this thing about, I don't want to disappoint anybody. I want them to like me. Yeah. Just like, wow.
When I first found the Enneagram, I couldn't decide if I was a 3 or a 9 because I resonated so much with people seeing me. There was a high expectation for me growing up. And so I thought that I was trying to like achieve success, but it's more just like, if I disappoint anybody, that's going to cause disconnection. There's going to be negative feelings. Other people wouldn't define that as conflict, but I think for a lot of 9s, that feels like conflict. If someone has any sort of negative feelings towards me.
Totally. Yeah.
I resonate with that as well. And that's our chameleon nature, right? So like, it's easy for us. I think it comes naturally to flow between these different relationships and be whatever is needed in any context in order to prevent that turbulence. I think for me, like, growing up in a more stressful environment, it came out as like a hypervigilance even, and like anticipating, my mental space was just constantly occupied by like the anticipation of other people's needs and disappointments and going out of my way and trying to predict what would happen before it would happen to try and curb some of those disappointments.
Yeah. I so loved so much of this, so much richness here, that it's hard for me to like pick and choose which one I want to reflect on. But one of the things is, I think in terms of the sequencing that you were laying out, Nate, it's like, I think the key thing for a lot of 9s is because of the merging and the sort of losing yourself in that space of trying to keep people from disliking you, particularly people that you respect, is that there can be a lack of engagement in your own priorities, right? And so when you're talking about responsibility, taking responsibility, I think that makes a lot of sense from that standpoint. And then there was something that you picked up on, Luke, which is like, a lot of us, we will suffer more if we don't do the work, and that's true for all 9 types, regardless of who you are. 9, it's I had to come to that point myself. But I think what's unique is the way you're describing the need for responsibility, the need to actually picture how, if you don't move forward as a 9 and take priority, take your right action, is the virtue of the 9 is. If you don't do that, there will be greater suffering, right? So I remember when we did the Driven to Drawn podcast, our 9s were saying, well, the thing is that the part about being drawn is actually terrifying because it requires change and it requires some things that I'm not sure I want to engage in. And so there can be sort of like, again, a laying back and a pulling back on the self that then prevents a sort of, inspiring message of growth and development and of reaching, your own dreams from actually materializing in the life of a 9. But for all of us 9 types, it's absolutely true that if we don't do our work and take responsibility and do our work, we end up suffering a whole lot more.
I think for me, and it goes back to my dad, and I can remember I was married. I don't know how many kids I had, but it kind of, all of a sudden it occurred to me that I could do everything the man wanted me to do, and he was still going to be miserable. And I was going to be miserable. So it was a lose-lose. And there was something about the clarity of that allowed me to really begin the process. And really, that story has a happy ending. But there were some key points as I was thinking about this too. I really confronted him and established my home. He was in my home. And I had done enough work to say, now, wait a minute, that right there, that's not going to happen in this space. So, and when I did that, it was really, I don't know, I was taking my life in my hands. I can feel it right now. I have never been so frightened in my whole life. And he backed up and and he was great. And I thought, geez, why hadn't I been doing that? But it was for me the clarity of knowing even if I did everything, it wasn't going to be enough. And I needed to I felt if I took it on, at least I could be right. At least I could be authentic to myself.
Yeah.
At least I would know that I was okay, and that was huge for me.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah. Yeah. Really good.
Truly.
I think the 9 will continually have this issue with boundaries. I don't know. For me, that's always been the thing, is like we're surrounded by these emotional dominators in our life. And I think as children, we don't realize, that other people deal with this differently, rather than just caving to this person who's big and powerful. And my dad was an 8. And so it's all about,
mine was as well.
Yeah. That's a tough relationship. And it's, there's bullies everywhere, but having the courage to have those boundaries is really hard. And, but I think it's again, the irony of being a 9, which is the only way to have peace is to go through that conflict. And so,
yeah.
Well done.
You named a key feature of that whole thing of the sort of like merging that 9s will do. And, the lack of boundaries and that result from the sort of just automatic merging. Another pattern, and when I coach a 9, I point out those features as like they're neutral. There's absolutely nothing wrong with merging. Merging is a great tool. The ability to shapeshift, to be a chameleon is a great tool. There's nothing wrong with these in and of themselves. But it's when they go towards, protecting the self from this disruption, this internal sense of disruption, that it can go overboard, and then end up becoming something that pulls you away from connection and relationships. So I think what all of you are describing is like that movement towards engagement, boundaries, facing the conflict, as terrifying as it is, which includes things like, there are things I want to do. with my life.
Yes.
Well, it's the idea of merging, how, at its best can serve as a springboard for deep connection and for fast connection,
Yes.
and at its worst, you lose yourself in the process, and that's why the boundaries matter so much. But I remember at a young age, even my dad asking me, what goals do you have? What are your goals? And I'm like, goals? Like what? Oh, I just want to be, man. Like, I don't want, like, why do I need goals? Like, what's the point of that?
I would just say whatever goals I thought they wanted me to have. So
Smart.
I also had a memory. I can remember my dad when I was graduation from high school and applied and seeing these different campuses and stuff. And he got very impatient with me. I needed to make a decision, make a damn decision.
Yeah.
And I can remember vividly going and walking onto the campus that I selected. But what I remember in that memory was that it felt right. And as a body person, and I haven't thought about that for a very long time either, but I just thought, wow. And I have told other people, I have recommended, to other students, you need to go and walk on the campus. How does it feel? You need to let yourself know how it feels.
Good for you.
And that is, and that's a huge, huge.
I love that.
And it's a positive memory. I went home and I said, this is where I'm going. It felt right.
Yeah.
And that was okay.
Absolutely. You're a body type, as you said. That's how you do a lot of your learning and your decision making. And so, really good. Let's, I hate wrapping up because I love this, but let's wrap up with one thing. What's one thing that you would celebrate in your life, an area of development that you feel like, I have grown in this way? This is one of the things that's really healthy for nines, as it is for all 9 types, but particularly nines who can kind of think about the things that need to be done, how they need to grow, change, adapt, all the stuff that I'm not quite what I should be. So maybe something you're celebrating of your own growth that you would like to share.
I was in the class with Joel early this spring, and the piece that really spoke to me was about being a body type and the 3 centers. And I got a lot more to learn about many other pieces, but the fact that just being able at this juncture to recognize. So since January, I've really been paying attention. I started having insomnia issues when I was 10 years old. And I have to tell you, I am doing better. And the reason I am doing better is because, insomnia has to do with your body. And so I've been having good conversations. I've been listening to my body and learning different feelings. And I have paid attention to what might have triggered this today, what anxiety, what happened today, or what's going on right now. And listening for an emotion, and then going to think about it.
That's a brilliant order.
The shift of order.
Yeah.
And the only thing I can say is that I am astounded by the space, by the mental space.
Yes.
And that I don't have another way to describe it. If I do it in that order, and I got to tell you, I have slept better in the last 2 weeks. In fact, the last 2 days we've been on the road, and I'm thinking, this is really easy. Well, part of the reason this is really easy is because I'm really sleeping. And I am celebrating this.
You should be.
This is decades of practice. Decades of practice.
Oh my gosh. Well, listen, folks, it's a free podcast, and you just got some gold, because the truth of it is what Anna is saying is exactly right. It's for all types, by the way. That's actually a really good order, because your body is your first line of defense, and it picks up on data, it picks up on all kinds of things in the space. Then your emotions take over from there and are really interacting with what's being picked up by the body. And then the rational space is the last. And if we don't get that order correct, we can end up in these loops and end up stuck, trying to make sense of things and over leveraging the sort of rational space. So
it has
really
been amazing.
Stuff,
I have never thought until these last few these last few months that my body, we think about our bodies as actors. It's about behavior. It's about,
Yeah.
but I've never thought about my body as a listener, as part of the listening apparatus. I'm a speech therapist, so it's been just huge. So I'm excited. I'm celebrating because it's going to impact lots of things, I think.
Absolutely. Really cool.
I guess after doing a bit of work and a couple people coming into my life who really taught me a lot, I had a really serious conversation with my parents that was really scary for me, that I told them a lot of things that I was very ashamed of and was just like laying everything out there, very honest, which that's something that I've thought of a lot as about being a 9, is I'm not the most honest person. I kind of lie by omission a lot of times. So having that hard conversation and feeling a lot of disconnection for a long time, but ultimately like our relationship is stronger than it's ever been now. And I think that's a big reason why, is I feel like both for them and for me, I feel like an adult now. Like I had a very adult conversation with you, and whatever you think of me after that is up to you. And I feel like we've been able to have more of like an adult friendship now, instead of the parent-child relationship.
Beautiful.
So good. Yay.
The area I've really grown in the most, I think, is learning to engage in healthy conflict. That conflict is okay. That it doesn't mean everything is ruined. And being able to speak up, be assertive about my feelings, about my thoughts, my ideas, and knowing that in safe relationships that's going to be received, and that will be able to be further discussion and disagreement, but still being able to arrive at a place of agreement or understanding, or whatever it's leading to specifically. And that's leaps and bounds for me, because I was a very classic 9, avoid conflict at all costs, no matter what.
Yeah. Wonderful.
I think it's crazy how surprised you find yourself when you come out of a conflict and it's resolved. You're like, whoa, this was an option the whole time. But yeah, I think for me, I've also had a really hard time with sleep. I think to me, sleep was like, it was more like powering off. And so I'd sleep all the time. Like I remember sleeping for 20 hours in a row once, because of, you have that anxiety and that depression, and you've been not resting for so long. But lately I've been getting up early, and that's not something I ever thought I would be able to do, because of that exhaustion. And so I got up at 5:45 this morning, and I wrote out what I was going to say for this podcast. And when I think back, I think, wow, like it seems small. And, my wife is the one, she pops right out of bed exactly 6 o'clock every morning, doesn't even set an alarm. But for me, it's like, this seems like the most impossible mountain to climb of like facing my day and accepting all the pains and the hardness and myself even before the day begins. So
yeah, really good. I love that. Yeah, absolutely. And these are, there is nothing small. Anyways, I wanted to say thank you so much. So I'm deeply grateful to each of you. And this has been a special time for me, and I'm hoping it was for you as well.
And we want to thank you all for listening. You 9s out there, we're so glad that you are a part of this and you are doing your work. If you're a type 9 and you've ever thought about getting coaching, a lot of what it has to do with is integrating the 3 centers. Are you getting your head, your heart, and your body all in line together? It's not about becoming something else. It's not about comparing yourself to someone else. It's about you being fully you and returning to your values and living from those outside of the story that has been put upon you. So you can reach out to us at theartofgrowth.org if that is something you're interested in. And for anyone who's part of an organization thinking about bringing us in, You can take a look at some of the content we've produced for free if you contact us, and we can send you the information of a recent webinar we did on the 9 leadership styles. Because in what we have found working from small companies to Fortune 100 companies is that we need to communicate better, have better conflict, and value the way that other people think. Because we have seen in these companies that sometimes the value of diversity only goes skin deep. But for our 9s out there, may you remember that your needs are neutral, and may you question the creeping stories of not enough or I am not enough. It is by you living into your peacemaker nature, living into your gift for wanting to draw consensus, that you will thrive in your gift and not be sabotaged by the desire to merge. You too are here to do good work. And what we ultimately need from you is for you to do that from a place that is natural to you. Grace and growth, my friends.